The nation wanted on now. Favorite coming up so you can telekinesis moving the crowd. I done took up the bleach to people they need to sit off the ground. We be fighting the bleeding.
No More Sleep Game Script is all about helping fantasy football owners with their week-to-week matchups. Rather than relying on things like sit-start lists, which is focused on players, that's unpredictable, okay? You don't know what injuries are going to take place. You don't know if someone gets cut, retired, or your team might look different. The team you have today might look different next week because of waiver wire or trade, or whatever the case may be. At No More Sleep, our focus is to give you information so you can make informed decisions. And when it comes to understanding who to start and who to bench, the best thing to do is look at game script because, as we say, coaches don't get injured. So in this video, we're going to focus on the game script between week 1 matchup, Rams versus the Panthers. Two teams that have many fantasy football players that are probably going to be starting in someone's lineup. But what we're going to give you today are 3 things to consider so that you can make an informed decision on which person to play. The first thing we're going to look at, the first thing you should consider is low attempts, many yards. Low attempts, many yards. Now, when you look at these two teams, you would think, okay, they got good defenses. And you know what? Offensive coordinators think the same. But it's not for the same reasons. When you see offensive coordinators planning for another team, there are a few things that they're looking for. They're looking at what weaknesses can they exploit and where can we be consistent. Okay, we don't want to have to rely on things that may or may not happen. Let's figure out what we can be consistent in, and let's define what the upside is. With both defenses, they are starkly similar when it comes to how they deal with rushing. They are very good at stopping the run on a first and second down. But every now and again, they give up these huge plays on third and fourth down, which make it possible for running backs to have a limited amount of attempts. And again, offensive coordinators do not try to come into the game against the Panthers or Rams defense saying we're going to run the ball 30 times. No one is ever doing that. No one ever runs the ball that much against the Panthers and Rams. However, you don't need to, because both of them are at the bottom of the pack when it comes to the amount of rushing average that they allowed last year. So both were bottom 5 and allowing rushing yards of 20 plus yards or more, and they were bottom 12 when it came to the rushing average that they allowed. And the Rams were dead last when it came to rushing average. They allowed 5.1 yards per carry last year. Okay, that is remarkably high. I could run against that team. Now, the other thing you want to pay attention to is the kind of running backs that will be successful against these defenses. So from a fantasy football perspective, the first thing you want to look at is your running back someone that's involved in running and passing? Because again, you're not going to see a lot of attempts. Therefore, your running back cannot rely on just the attempts. Okay, so if he's involved in a passing game and in the receiving game as well, then that's going to give him more opportunities. And in fantasy football, the more opportunities, the better. The second thing you want to look at with your running back is his rushing average, obviously. Both these teams gave up high rushing average. I already talked about the Rams 5.1, which is like record breaking. But the Panthers were not too far behind. They gave up 4.7 yards per carry last year. So if you have a running back that is good at running the ball on limited attempts, and what you can do is just look at his average. If it's anything around 4.5, then he's probably going to have a field day in this matchup. Third thing you want to look at is a running back that has good average of rushes that go 20 yards or more. You can go to NFL.com stats and just plug it in, look at your guy, and look at the 20-plus column, okay? How many rushes does that individual have in the 20-plus column compared to the other person that you're considering starting on that team? If you can't pay attention to that, then maybe look up yards after contact, because that's another thing that leads to big plays. And basically all we're saying is that you need a big play running back, because I already told you that both defenses have allowed the 5th worst amount of rushes of 20 plus yards or more. The last thing is avoid handcuffs. Why? Goes back to what we just said. You're not going to see a lot of attempts on either side of the ball from a rushing perspective. So if you're relying on a handcuff to get rushing yards and you're hoping that is going to be because there's going to be a lot of rushing attempts split between him and the other person. Don't do it. We don't expect to see a lot of rushing attempts in this game. All right, so the second thing you want to consider is Cam Newton's his new throwing motion. Everyone is going to be talking about Cam Newton's throwing motion. Well, in this game, we don't think that is going to make a difference. There are mainly two reasons why. The first is the offensive coordinator for the Panthers is going to test this new throwing motion, and he wants to do it in week 1. And the reason for that is because they don't know how much time they have with Cam Newton. It was a scary thing to see him get injured in the preseason game, and they do have a competitive team. So while they have Cam Newton, they're going to try to use him in the capacity that they planned for. So you can expect Cam Newton, despite the fact that he should be exploiting the Rams with deep passes, and we'll get to that in a second, you can expect Cam Newton to be focused on short passes. So let's talk about this new throwing motion. At the end of the day, it's not about what it looks like. The main thing that he's trying to do is reduce the amount of interceptable passes. Okay, interceptable passes is the focus of this new throwing motion, which means he's going to expect to see more short-term, to medium range throws. That's what he's looking to do. And if you look at last year, which was his best year ever from a completion percentage as well as a QB rating, it was primarily because he increased the amount of short passes that he threw. We know Cam Newton has a rocket of an arm. He's one of the most powerful arms. He got one of the most powerful arms in the NFL. However, what's successful is when he throw the ball short. Therefore, the people that's going to benefit the most from this are several categories. The first, receivers or running backs that can catch the ball. Now, the thing about the Panthers is that the supporting cast is very good. Last year, they were ranked, number 14 as far as, if you look at the entire supporting cast behind Cam Newton, they were ranked number 14. They were the 14th most efficient supporting cast. All the receivers can also catch. Majority of them have extremely high catch rates, and that proves when you look at their numbers because they're ranked number 12 in receptions. Okay, so you can't necessarily choose who to start by saying who can catch the ball the best, but it's the first thing you need to start with, okay? So let's just make sure that they are good with their catch rate, because Cam Newton is going to go to the person who is consistently catching the ball with this new throwing motion. The second thing is separation. When it comes to getting the ball in the short to intermediate range, it's important that the receiver or the running back can get separation in their routes. If you don't know where to look that up, well, first of all, if you do know where to look it up, then you look for cushion and you look at target separation for that individual. If you want to make things easier, then what you want to look at is how often does this receiver catch the ball and get a good amount of yards thereafter. So on NFL.com stats, what you can look at are two categories. Look at receptions, and then compare that to the other persons on their team, and then look at their yards after catch. And a way to indicate that from NFL.com stats is to see which of those two people you're comparing on the same team have the highest 20 plus and 40 plus. For those fantasy football gurus who understand player profiler, then obviously what you want to look at is the target separation, air yards, and then you also want to pay attention to yards after the catch. Okay. Now, we talked about being able to catch. We talked about having separation. Here's the interesting thing. Receiving average is something we talk about all the time. Well, guess what? When it comes to Cam Newton's new throwing motion, the person with the lowest receiving average is the one who wins, okay, from a starting perspective, because he's going to be throwing it short. You don't want someone with a high receiving average who is used to catching the ball deep. We think Cam Newton is going to be throwing less deep balls. So that is going to bode well for any receiver or running back who has a receiving average of less than 10 yards. All right. Now, the last thing you want to look at is a running back involved in the catching. That's a no-brainer. We just talked about, being able to catch the ball in the short-term range. Obviously, Running backs tend to do that. So if you have a running back who meets that criteria, then that's a good thing for that individual. Okay, so now the third thing that you want to consider is highlight worthy receiving touchdowns. Both teams last year were ranked at the bottom when it came to allowing receiving touchdowns. In fact, they were bottom 12 and allowed 2 receiving touchdowns on average per game. It's probably going to be slightly higher than that in this game. And it's not because the DBs are bad on the teams. These DBs are actually pretty good. The problem is they are not consistently good and tend to give up huge plays. And those plays are typically after the 50-yard line. And when you have a big play after the 50-yard line, you don't have much room to go in order to get a touchdown. So you can expect up to 4 to 5 receiving touchdowns in this game. Now, all eyes are going to be on a guy named Aubrey Pleasant. He is the cornerback coach for the Rams. And the reason for that is because Aubrey Pleasant has a huge task on his hands. He's been with Wade Phillips since Wade Phillips got to the Rams. However, we have not seen any improvement in the consistency of the DBs there. What I mean is, if you look at the Rams defense, the defense is okay, it's solid, but when it comes to when it comes to defending the reception, the Panthers and the Rams are very good at that. They don't allow too many receptions. However, the Rams give up so many yards, it's insane. And part of it is because Aubrey Pleasant focuses more on interceptions and turnovers than he does on actually being consistent. And as you can understand, as a cornerback, you don't have to be consistent to get interceptions. You can let a guy get 200 yards, but the 2 receptions you get in that game wins you the game. So I do understand some coaches focus on turnovers like that. However, from a fantasy football perspective, it's insane how much the Rams allow receivers to stack up in the yards. So let me put some numbers behind that. The Rams allowed the 5th most receptions of 20-plus yards, and they allowed the 2nd most receptions of 40-plus yards. Also, in the postseason, the Rams, in just the postseason alone, the Rams allowed 14 receptions of 20 and 40-plus yards, and they also gave up the most receptions. So a lot of people talk about that Super Bowl and they look at the offenses, but at the end of the day, the cornerbacks, the safeties, they were the main issues in the postseason as well as the regular season, and Aubrey Pleasant is on the bubble. So what does that mean? From a Rams perspective, you can expect the Rams to try to clean up their DB play when it comes to consistency and shutting down receivers on man-to-man. However, history is just going to repeat itself, and you can expect to also see some big plays against the Rams. Unfortunately, is not the amount of big plays that you will hope to coming into this game, because Cam Newton is probably not going to throw as many deep passes as he would like to, given the fact that he's focusing on a new throwing motion. But if there's any team that he wanted to exploit with deep passes, it should have been the Rams. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to do that. So we already told you what receivers to pay attention to on the Panther side. Again, that's going to be focused primarily on receivers that have good hands, have a low receiving average, and has good separation. And if they can get involved in a run, that's good because that gives them another opportunity as well. But if you want upside on a Panthers team, then you get the receiver with the highest receiving average, but expect that individual to not have too many attempts. So out of the 5 or 6 deep balls that we expect Cam Newton to throw, if you get the receiver who has the highest amount of have the highest receiving average, then that person is probably going to get up to 60% of that share of those deep balls going. And they're probably going to complete it because the Rams are not good at defending that. So we talked about Aubrey Pleasant. The reason why we bring him up is because turnovers will still be a focus, but I expect, and I don't know if you guys have IDP players, but we do expect to see the Rams decrease the amount, just a little bit of focus on turnovers, which means increase in man-to-man. Okay, so again, target separation is going to be important from the receiver side on the Panthers, And defensively, this means that the Rams linebackers are probably going to have to rely a little bit more on the cornerback's tackling ability. When you increase the amount of man-to-man, that means the cornerback obviously is sticking with the receiver. But as soon as they see that receiver coming to block or trying to break, and they realize it's a run, then they have to come up and tackle. So if you have IDP and you're trying to determine what cornerback or what person to start on the Rams, then you want to get the cornerback who has been consistently playing man-to-man and who had the most tackles last year. Don't focus on interceptions. Now, the other thing that you want to look for is whoever have the highest red zone target share. So the red zone target share is important because, again, the Rams give up these big plays, but they then do a good job, stopping the team from scoring. So with that being said, if these big plays are happening, you can expect a short field for the Panthers. And in that short field, if the receiver has a good red zone target share, that means many opportunities in this game to get a touchdown in that range, because they're going to be in that range quite a bit, especially if we're wrong here. I'm hoping I am. But if Cam Newton decides to forget the throwing motion and exploit the Rams on the deep pass, then you can even increase that amount of short field situations. So you definitely want to get a receiver on the Ram side, on the Panther side, who has good red zone target share. You also want to get the same thing on the Ram side, because the Panthers gave up, again, the 5th worst amount of receiving touchdowns. So get someone who has good red zone target share. The sweet spot, the sweet spot for a receiver in this game is 11.6 receiving average, unless you're trying to identify opportunities for consistency on the Panther side. So again, a lower receiving average is actually good when it comes to the Panther side, but sweet spot across the majority of the receivers that will probably be starting in this game in people's fantasy lineups, you want to look for 11.6 receiving average or more. And then lastly, you want a receiver who, on the Ram side, who has the most rushing carries. Why? Because Todd Gurley is going to be on a pitch count, which means he's going to have less rushing attempts. Obviously, last year, whenever Todd Gurley did not rush, they didn't just drop the entire game script. They just gave that workload to another running back. And yes, they got Darrell Henderson there now, and he's a talented back. However, when you are game scripting for pitch count, then you have time to think about where that additional workload will go, versus when you're in the game and then you realize that your running back can't run. So then you just stick with the same game script and you just plug another guy in there. Given the fact that they have made this decision well into the off season, we expect Sean McVay and his team to have come up with a different solution for what to do when Todd Gurley is not in, and we do expect that to be more screenplays. So if you have a receiver on the Rams and you want to understand, how do I separate this receiver from the other receiver on the Rams? They got the same receiving average. They both hit the 11.6 sweet spot. They both have the same amount of red zone target share. Then the thing that's going to break the tie is looking at which of them have the most rushing carries last year. And the reason for that is because the person who had the most rushing carries last year, from a game script perspective, means that the offense trusted them game script wise to even allow them to touch the ball from a rushing perspective. And that's a good thing, because we're going to see more screenplays this year from the Rams, given that Todd Gurley is on a pitch count. And screenplays are good to go to receivers who are very good at running the ball and have yards after catch. So that's the tiebreaker. Look for a receiver. If you understand player profile, then go on there and just look at yards after catch and just pay attention to the amount of carries they had and see where they're ranked. But if you just want to do it on NFL.com/stats, then you go there and then you pay attention to what receiver between the two that you're trying to compare had the most rushing attempts last year on the Rams. Those are the three conclusions: low attempts, many yards, Cam Newton's new throwing motion, and highlight weekly or highlight worthy receiving touchdowns. So we expect 4 to 5, maybe even 6 receiving touchdowns if you count the running backs. That's it. Hit the like button, subscribe, because we're going to be putting these videos out. We won't do every single matchup every week, so please drop a comment below and let us know which ones you want us to focus on. We try to get the games that tend to have the majority of the fantasy football players on them, that are probably competing against other fantasy football players that are probably on your team, on the same team. So if there is a team or a matchup that you want us to focus on, we need to see it in the comments, and then we'll put that out there. That's the No More Sleep game script.
Go get it, I got it. Get it, go get it, I got it. Get it, go get it, I got it.